In this session, we're going to take a look at the Accela data model. Some of the key objectives we're going to take a look at today is we're going to learn the difference between configuration, transactional, and reference data. We're going to learn about some of the data association amongst data objects within the data model. And lastly, we're going to take a look at a record in Accela Citizen Access and compare how it relates to what we've just learned. Let's start with transactional data. So transactional data is basically when you request to start a process within the system. For example, a customer comes in and files a permit application. They're requesting that they want to build a new residential home. The record that gets created in the system and all the objects associated with that record are what we consider transactional data. So let's start with a record. A record is really the main transactional object within Excel automation. It contains all the association with other objects that define what that record is. It's up to the agencies when they set up Excel automation to define what record types are in the configuration. For example, a building permit, a general business license, a professional license renewal, a change amendment. All of those are different record types and are defined during the implementation period of setting up Excel automation. Some of the information about the record we'll take a look at now. First up, address, parcels, and owners. We refer to those in Excel automation, and our customers refer to them as APO. They really define the location and property ownership for a particular record and are heavily used in our land management implementation. There's definitely a relationship between address, parcels, and owners. Typically, a parcel may contain one or more address and one or more owners. Some other objects have to do with people and entities, so we call them contacts and professionals. These particular objects identify the people, so we're talking applicants is the most generic one. Other things, if I'm talking land management, might be an architect or a general contractor or an agent to do business on behalf of the property owner, things like that. Contacts can also represent entities. So it might be a business in the case of filing for a business license application, capturing the name of the business and the FEIN about that business. All of that is capturing information about that particular entity. And professionals. Professionals are really kind of a specialized form of contacts. They represent things like contractors, right? So a contractor might have a license number either with the city or the state. That license must be current to be associated with a new building permit and things of that nature. The next object we're going to take a look at are really ones that drive the process for a particular record. So when a record comes in, it's nothing more than a request for something from the agency. That request must then go through some sort of a review, maybe a regulatory process, those types of things. So let's start with workflow. Workflow are really a collection of tasks that may happen one by one. Some tasks might happen in parallel, but they really drive the process by which a record may be approved. Inspections. Inspections are very similar to workflow. Really, they're a task that needs to happen in the process for that record to be approved. But inspections tend to happen in the field by inspectors. So they may go out and take a look at a construction site and make sure that the footing has been poured correctly or the framing has gone up correctly and everything adheres to code. Other items in the process that are indirectly related are fees and payments. So fees are the rules by which a record might have to pay for something. So fees manage what is that calculation. Do I charge a flat fee? Do I charge by some sort of a quantity that's captured within the application? Things of that nature. And then subsequently, payments are what the applicant or the requester must pay to submit that record for consideration. Custom forms and tables. You may also hear these referred to by Excel automation customers as application-specific information and application-specific information tables. And a lot of times you'll hear them referred to in their shorter form of ASI and ASIT. But what these represent are custom data per a record. So an agency is going to have many different record types defined to manage the many processes that they're supporting in Excel automation. Within an individual record, there may be data that's record specific to that particular record type. Things like on a building permit, I might be capturing square footage, number of floors, things of that nature. But on electrical permit, I'm not going to be capturing square footage. I'm going to be capturing number of fixtures, number of outlets, things like that. So I capture that using custom tables and forms. Forms are exactly what they look like, sound like. It's typically, like filling out a form on a paper, right? Custom tables allow us to capture data in a more tabular form. Think like an Excel spreadsheet, but as a part of the application when I'm filling it out. Documents and reports. Now we're talking about third-party inputs and being able to define outputs. Documents are items that can be attached to a particular record. Those documents might be uploaded as a part of the application process, maybe in a PDF form. Maybe I needed to provide the fact that I have flood insurance for my particular property or approval from my historic district to do this construction that I'm doing on a historic building. Things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's going to be things like PDFs. It might be a picture. It might be a spreadsheet. Things that support the approval of that particular request from the agency. So applicants might upload things. Also, inspectors might upload documents as well. For example, when they're on site, they may want to take a picture of an issue that they found on the site. They may mock up that image with areas of concern, and then they'll upload that particular document and associate it to that particular record. Reports, on the other end, are actually outputs out of the record. So anything from a letter that might need to be generated out of the system, kind of like a mail merge, to tabular reports, keeping track of statistics, performance management, anything that's an output out of the record or collection of records is considered a report. Conditions and conditions of approvals. These can represent a couple different things on a record, but most traditionally a condition will represent some sort of a hold, something that can stop the process from moving forward until it's met. This might be a lien on the property, a violation on an address. Maybe it is a hold on the general contractor. Maybe the general contractor has expired and they can't move forward until they are brought current. So it's things that can hold up the process. And these holds can be applied to an individual record. They can be applied to reference data, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But in short, that means there could be a hold on an address or maybe a contractor. And when there's a hold on that address or contractor, that'll affect any records associated to that address or contractor. But that's conditions. And then conditions of approval are very similar, but just a little bit different. Conditions of approval are typically used to track application requirements. So based on how I filled out my application or the type of application that I filled out, there might be a series or a checklist of items that I need to provide. And those are typically tracked with conditions of approval. Inspectors and users. So these are the actors that are involved with the approval of this particular record or processing this particular record. Typically, these are either system or agency users that interact with the system to move the process forward. We talked a little bit about inspections. Now, inspectors are the users that actually carry out those inspections in the field. Users are the more generic term, or really anybody that has authenticated access to the system are considered users. And those users may do processing such as signing off on workflow tasks, signing off on conditions of approvals, applying conditions, applying payments, things of that nature. So these are some of the more common objects that you'll interact with when it has to do with a record. There's actually many, many more objects available within the Accela automation system, and you can take a look at those on a developer portal under the data model documentation to get more information about those more detailed objects. Let's move on to configuration data. So when we were looking at transactional data, we took a look at records. And we talked very briefly there that said that an agency is going to define what a record is. And that is all handled in configuration data. So there are user interface screens within Accela automation that administrators use to define records and what objects are associated to those records, what attributes about those records make them unique, things of that nature. So let's take a look at some of the configuration data that goes into setting up records. So a record, I have to define what a record type is, and a record type allows me to categorize records into various groups depending on what they represent. Again, examples, if we're just looking at building permitting, I might have a grouping of commercial building permits with more specific types under commercial building permits, and I also might have residential permits with more specifics under there. I will define a numbering scheme, so when I open up a new permit application, what do I want the numbering to look like? Do I want it to be BLD and then the year, say 14-00000123 in a sequential scheme like that? Or maybe I want it to start with the year 14 BLD-000001. The numbering scheme defines what that format looks like. From then, I also have to, on my record, associate the various objects that I want to associate with my record. Things like fee schedule, custom data, workflow, inspection types, onwards and onwards. So let's take a look. Workflow. What tasks and in what order do I want to associate to this record? So I can set up one workflow that may handle, let's say, commercial building permits and associate that to multiple record types. So all those different record types follow the same process. Once I have all my tasks set up, then I also have to associate what status for each task. So, for example, I may have a review task, and some of the statuses associated to that task might be additional information required, review complete, review denied, things of that nature. And depending on what status I choose for that particular task, that's going to say what task do I go to next. Do I go to the very next task? Do I stay in the current task? Do I skip back to a previous task? Or do I skip forward and skip tasks based on requirements that were already met? Next, we'll take a look at inspections. Similar to workflow, I can set up one group of inspections that might be applicable to all commercial building permits, and then associate that group to all those various record types. But within that inspection group, it's going to say what type of inspections are available, what are the possible results for each individual inspection. Is there a specialized checklist that I need to follow to make sure I do that inspection correctly? Things of that nature. Record data. So this is going to be when we talked about custom forms and custom tables. What data do I need to capture about this particular record type? What data is different on this record than any other record? This is where I'm going to capture that type of information. Fees. What type of fees apply? What is the calculation? Is it a flat fee? Is it based on data that was collected in the record data? So number of stories, number of offices, things of that nature. Is that going to factor in calculating what my fee is? Accounting codes. Once I collect money for this record, how do I account for that in our accounting system or our financial system? Documents. What types of documents apply? For maybe a larger permit, do I need to submit a set of plans? Do I need to submit any approvals from the planning office or a historic group? Those types of things. I can define what document types would apply for this particular record type, and that would allow customers and back office staff to upload those documents and correctly identify what type of document it is when I'm uploading it. Record status. What are the list of applicable statuses that a record can fall into throughout the process? For example, when I first submit the application, the status might just be received. Once the review coordinator has distributed the record for review, the status may be in review. Once the review is complete, the status might be issued. Once the final inspection has completed, the status might be finalized and ultimately closed at some point. So we have to define what are the applicable statuses for this record type. These are just some of the configuration elements that might go into defining a record type, but you can now kind of start seeing where the various objects within the data model start getting associations to the record. Next, let's take a look at reference data. So what is reference data? Some may refer to reference data as master data, but at the end of the day, it's data that can be searched for. So I can reference all the addresses in a particular city, all the parcels, that sort of thing, and then associated to a record. A lot of times this reference data is maintained in a third-party system. So things like parcel address and property ownership data, that might be the system of record, might be the assessor's office, or it might be stored in a GIS system. And Accela automation will reference that third-party system to pull that data in and associate it to records. Reference data allows within the system for us to see what records might be associated to a particular address or a particular person. What licenses does this person hold? Or what jobs are this contractor currently working on? Or what permits have occurred on this particular address? Referring back to the objects that we talked about in transactional data, we talked about conditions. All of these reference objects can also have conditions on them, meaning that a hold can be applied at the reference level, meaning that that can affect any record within the system that might be associated to that particular reference object. So those are the three types of data within Accela automation that we're covering within this particular post. Now let's take a look within Accela Citizen Access. Let's take a look within Accela Citizen Access to take a look at a real-life example of how these objects are associated. So up top here we have something called an application type, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at the final review screen. So as an applicant, I've already gone through all the steps to supply all the information I need to apply for a particular record within the system. In this case, I'm applying for a commercial 10-story permit. So that's defined right here. So the record type here is building commercial 10-story. And then I associated it to an address and a parcel and an owner. When I applied, I actually only looked up this particular address, and then the system automatically pulled in the associated parcel and the associated owner because those reference objects have a parent-child relationship within the reference data. Under the applicant, I pulled in my information here, and I pull this information from my account. So I'm actually logged into what's called Accela Citizen Access here, and I have an account in Accela Citizen Access that already has my contact information associated, and that's my reference contact. So down here, I applied with my reference contact, again giving me the ability to see all the records that might be associated to me. Down here under licensed professional, I associated a plumber, general contractor 14123 again, that's another reference object. Under detailed information, I'm starting to say, okay, well, what's the application name? Said really tall building, general description, new apartment, high rise, new excellent apartment. So just a little bit of information. What's the job value? So what's the estimated cost of construction? Many times fees will be based off of that. Here we see that ASI acronym that I referenced to, but in the object model that we looked at before, we referred to this as a custom form. So we're saying how many offices are going to be located in this building, how many exits, what's the name of the elevator company, how many stairwells. These are all custom data attributes that I set up specific for this particular record. Under ASI table, this is what we call the custom table. And this is where I can capture one or more instances of data. So here I'm listing out the floor numbers and the number of bathrooms on each floor. Down here I have under attachments, that's where I can upload documents. Let's move forward to the next screen here. On the next screen has to do with fees. And typically this is automatically calculated for the user, but I'll put this in here manually. And we'll say, based on how I filled out the application, I owe $250. It created that calculation for me. At this point, I'm going to continue my application. And I can now pay for my application before it's submitted to the back office. And the workflow kicks off to start processing that application towards approval. And that concludes our session on the data model overview. What you can expect in future posts is we'll start taking a look at each of these common objects in a bit more detail. We'll talk more about how those objects are utilized by our customers, but more importantly, we'll take a look at the many methods available within the API, start taking a look at some of the request and response, and look at the data in those requests and responses within the API and how they apply to what you might be working on. Thank you.